In the mid of 19th century, Britain experienced an influx of Irish immigrants who swelled the populations of the major cities, including the East End of London. From 1882, Jewish refugees fleeing pogroms in Tsarist Russia and other areas of Eastern Europe emigrated into the same area. The parish of Whitechapel in London's East End became increasingly overcrowded, with the population increasingly to approximately 80,000 inhabitants by 1888. Work and housing conditions worsened and a significant economic underclass developed. 55% of children born in the East End died before they were even 5 years old. Robbery, violence, and alcohol dependency were commonplace, and the endemic poverty drove many women to prostitution to survive on a daily basis. In October 1888, London's Metropolitan Police Service estimated that there were 62 brothels and 1,200 women working as prostitutes in Whitechapel, with approximately 8,500 people residing in the 233 common lodging houses within the Whitechapel every night. With the nightly price of a single bed being $4 and the cost of sleeping upon a lean-to rope stretched across the bedrooms of these houses being $2 for adults or children. The economic problems in Whitechapel were accompanied by a steady rise in social tensions. Between 1886 and 1889, frequent demonstrations led to public intervention and public unrest, such as Bloody Sunday, anti-Semitism, crime, nativism, racism, social disturbance, and severe deprivation influenced public perceptions that Whitechapel was a notorious den of immorality. Such perceptions were strengthened in the autumn of 1888, when the series of vicious and grotesque murders attributed to Jack the Ripper received unprecedented coverage in the media. It is just getting started now. Keep watching to know more about this brutal serial killer. Jack the Ripper was an unidentified serial killer active in the largely impoverished areas in and around the Whitechapel district of London in 1888. In both the criminal case files and contemporary journalistic accounts, the killer was called the Whitechapel Murderer and the Leather Apron. Attacks ascribed to Jack the Ripper typically involved female prostitutes who lived and worked in the slums of the East End of London, whose throats were cut prior to abdominal mutilations. The removal of internal organs from at least 3 of the victims led to proposals that their serial killer must have anatomical or surgical knowledge. Rumors that the murderers were connected intensified in September and October 1888, and numerous letters were received by media outlets and Scotland Yard from individuals purporting to be the murderer. The name the Jack the Ripper originated in a letter written by an individual claiming to be the murderer that was disseminated in the media. The letter is widely believed to have been a hoax and may have been written by journalists in an attempt to heighten the interest in the story and increase their newspaper circulation. The From Hell letter received by George Lesk of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee came with a half of a preserved human kidney purportedly taken from one of the victims. The public came increasingly to believe in a single serial killer known as Jack the Ripper, mainly because of both the extraordinarily brutal nature of the murders and media coverage of the crimes. Extensive newspaper coverage bestowed widespread and enduring the international notoriety on the Ripper, and the legend solidified. A police investigation into a series of 11 brutal murders committed in the Whitechapel and Spitalfields between 1888 and 1891 was unable to connect all the killings conclusively to the murders of 1888. 5 victims, Mary Ann Nicholas, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, are known as the Canonical Five, and their murders between 31st August and 9th November 1888 are often considered the most likely to be linked. The murders were never solved, and the legends surrounding the crimes became a combination of genuine historical research, folklore, or pseudo-history. From the beginning of the investigation, Scotland Yard was flummoxed. The only thing known for sure about Jack the Ripper, assuming, as most theorists do, that he acted alone, is that he killed women. According to Edmund Reed, one of the detectives assigned to investigate the case, these were the only facts. The 5 women were all active or former prostitutes, and all of the victims were from the lower class. All lived no more than a quarter of a mile from one or another, and all the murders were committed after pub closing time. To Reid's key facts can be added another salient detail. No one ever heard a single scream or cry for help, unusual for such a densely populated neighborhood. None of the bodies exhibited defense wounds, such as slashes or bruising on the hands or forearms. The one solid reported sighting of the killer was on the early morning of September 8, 1888, when a woman saw Annie Chapman, accompanied by a foreigner of medium height, wrapped in a dark cloak. They believed to have been just met after 5:30 a.m., and her body was found half an hour later. Like all of his other victims, there were no signs of resistance and no one heard her cry out. The other aspect that all the cases had in common was, of course, the killer's use of a knife and his customary pattern of not only killing the women but defiling their dead bodies. At least 3 of his victims were found with internal organs removed, a detail that drove the sensationalist press of the day into a frenzy. A wave of panic spread across the whole east of London. Public fascination spiked after September 27, 1888, when both the Central News Agency and the police received a letter claiming to be from the killer. He taunted them for pursuing false leads and vowed in a broad London English, "I am down on the oars and I shall quit ripping them till I do get buckled." 3 days later, the mutilated body of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were found. As stated earlier, many believe the letter to be a hoax, but its signature, Jack the Ripper, gave the unknown killer his moniker. Hundreds of other letters followed, most of which were confirmed hoaxes. A few seemed genuine. Jack the Ripper's murders suddenly stopped in the fall of 1888, but London citizens continued to demand answers that would not come, even more than a century later. The ongoing case, which had spawned an industry of books, films, TV series, and historical tours, has met with a number of hindrances, including lack of evidence, a gamut of information, and false testimony, and tight regulations by the Scotland Yard. In 2011, British detective Trevor Marriott, who had long been investigating the Jack the Ripper's murders, made headlines when he was denied access to the uncensored documents surrounding the case by the Metropolitan Police. According to a 2011 ABC News article, London officers refused to give Marriott the files because they included protected information about police informants. In 2014, author and amateur sleuth Russell Edwards claimed to have determined the identity of Jack the Ripper by DNA results obtained from a shawl belonging to one of the victims, Catherine Eddowes. Edwards asserted the evidence pointed to Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant and one of the prime suspects in the grisly murders. The topic resurfaced when 2 biochemists published the results of their tests on the shawl in March 2019 edition of Journal of Forensic Sciences, again fingering Kosminski as a likely match. That finding was quickly disputed by geneticists who challenged the methodology used and insisted that the shawl had been contaminated by inappropriate handling. Till date, if people in Europe were asked for the most dreadful incident happened there, a majority would point out to Jack the Ripper. Though surgeons were doubted due to the professionalism in the way he operated, some presumed him to be a barber too. However, it has been more than 2 centuries since he started his play, and till date the case remains unsolved. Anything could have been happened in the past years. He might have lived an absolute normal life and passed away. Even though there are many reasons given for this unsolved mystery, there is one hard truth: the justice was not served.